Last week, I talked about my sense of what a synagogue is supposed to be. This week, I want to talk about my senses of what a synagogue is not supposed to be. Last week's drush hopefully left everybody walking out feeling good. I got a couple of emails to such a point. This week, maybe I'll get a few fewer emails like that, or a few more emails with slightly more pointed content, but I think it's important that we have balance between the two. Last week, we talked about the idea of a synagogue as an extended family. We said that the great existential challenge of modernity is loneliness. That for millennia, we as human beings dwelt in extended tribes, in big families, in settings where, if you had trouble with your spouse, you could talk with 10 other relatives who were a little further along and who would give you more wedding advice than you were prepared to give me. That if you were a teenager who couldn't take your parents anymore, that you had a dozen relatives to run away from home to who would also watch out for you and would keep the door open. That we lived for most of our development as human beings in extended, large families and tribes. And we had each other's backs. And now so many of us live so isolated, with so few people that we can turn to for the kind of support and solace and strength that we so desperately need. That one of the great challenges of modernity is loneliness, and one of the great responses to loneliness, really the only response that matters, is community. And if you don't have biological community, you create community. And that's what a synagogue is meant to be. It's meant to be a space where there are 100 people who will ask you how you are and actually care about the answer. Meant to be a space of people that you can share the best of times with and the worst of times with, who you know you can count on day after day, month after month, year after year. That is who we are supposed to be for one another. That's what a synagogue is supposed to be. Here's one of the things it's not supposed to be. A synagogue is not a monastery. A synagogue is not a bunker. A lot of people come to synagogue to escape the world. We come to synagogue to escape the world because the world is really tough. The world is really tough, and we feel, rightly so, assaulted by barrage of disaster, by barrage of tragedy, by barrage of insult to many of the principles that we hold dear. And so we come to a synagogue to escape from the world, to have just a few precious, quiet hours in which we can say, that's the world out there, but in here we dwell in holy space, and I don't need to concern myself with that. The Talmud challenges that depiction of synagogue. The Talmud says in Tractate Brachot that a synagogue is not a kosher space for prayer unless it has a window out on the world. A synagogue with no windows is treif. And they derive that idea from a number of different citations. One from a place in Daniel where it says that Daniel would pray in a room with a window facing Jerusalem. So in his exile, he would still see back in the direction of the promised land. And also from a line in this week's Torah portion, where Noah is told to build an ark, a refuge, a bunker, against the literal destruction of the world. But before he finishes the ark, God gives an instruction that says, you must place a window in this ark so that you can see out into the world. If I was building an ark to save myself from a flood of biblical proportion, the last thing I would want to have is a window. I want to be safe and warm and dry and inside where I can't see the horror that's going on outside. But God says you can be safe in your ark, but you cannot be disconnected from the tragedy that's happening around you. You cannot be isolated from the events, from the reality that's carrying you through the world at this point. If you don't have a window in your ark, if you don't have a window in your synagogue, if these are spaces where we simply go to retreat rather than spaces where we go with an acknowledgement that there is a broader world to engage out there with, we have not yet fulfilled our obligation as Jews. Synagogue has to be about more than singing songs and saying words and feeling good. Synagogue has to charge us with holy values, and sometimes even with a sense of outrage, a sense of chutzpah, a sense of a vision of what the world should be, and send us out into the world to be agents of change for those values, for that vision, to send us out into the world with that sense of chutzpah renewed, so that we can be part of the healing. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, one of the great Hasidic rabbis, said there are two kinds of tzaddikim, two kinds of righteous people. He says one is a tzaddik in pelts, a tzaddik who wears a fur coat, a tzaddik who keeps themselves warm with their righteousness, that the coat is made up of all the good deeds, of all the mitzvahs, of all the ways in which they have impacted the world, and that keeps them warm. He says that's one kind of tzaddik. But the greater tzaddik is the tzaddik who makes a fire. Because the tzaddik in pelts keeps themselves warm with their mitzvot. The tzaddik who lights a fire brings light and warmth to many more. He says this specifically regarding Noah. He says Noah was a tzaddik in pelts. He put himself in a bunker. He protected himself, clothed himself in the robe of his righteousness, and survived the flood. We would have to wait for Avraham and later for Moshe to learn about true tzaddikhood, the kind of tzaddik who makes a fire to keep a whole people, to keep a whole world warm. It bless us that synagogue should be a space of family and connection, and it should also be a space of agitation. It should be a space where we go to check in with our values, not to check out of the world, but to think, what are the values from this place that we need to carry out into the world? How can we be made better here so that we can go and make better there? Otherwise, we're simply huddling in our own individual coat of righteousness. Otherwise, we're not adding anything to a world which is so much a world in flood right now that's looking for us to be part of the healing. Shabbat Shalom.